was actually really shocked when a major Christian or Christianity and culture publication, began publishing, just screeds against the wearing of masks. The general editor, uh, you know, uh, was bragging about spitting on the streets in New York and called everybody who wear masks at all cowards. He apologized for that. Um, I could not understand, other than that he was carried away with an emotional response. This is something else that I should like to say about church. Churches have always been subject to health and safety code. And it is not considered a violation of the First Amendment that we are subject to health and safety code. All of our churches have a limit on the number of people that are in them. That's always been that way. The state has now reduced that limit to a quarter of its usual. But we've always had that limit,
But is that why the Paschal service is at midnight, so the fire marshal won't count?
No comment. I believe that having that service in the middle of the night has nothing to do with whether or not the fire marshal will visit. What I would say is that there's a definite. I remember once being called to visit a woman, and I had the holy gifts with me, and I had to put on not just a mask. I had to put on, like a paper suit and a beanie and booties and masks and shields and gloves and I did it all only to I was called, this person needs to see you, and so I went and saw her, and it was quite a drive away. Fortunately, there by really happenstance, an actual parishioner was in the same facility, which was at least 40 minutes away. So that was actually. It was actually, the trip wasn't wasted, but all of that, putting that stuff on, I went in there and discovered the person wasn't Orthodox and didn't want to see a priest. And I'm like, well, I'm all dressed up with I sang a Christmas carol for her because it was right after Christmas, and I felt like I should do something. I put on this, but nobody would have been interested in me, explaining that I didn't think that I was going to get sick. Now, almost all of us clergy have consumed the chalice many times, and we've never been sick from it. Not to kind of gross you out, but I'm sure many of us can report, and I've been a priest for 11 years now, so that's not nearly as long as many of the other reverend clergy. But sometimes somebody will actually leave mucosa on the spoon, and will consume it. Because we don't want to give it to the next person. And I've never even thought about it. It's just what has to be done. I will say the canons specifically tell you that you can and should. It says wash your mouth, but brush your teeth before coming to church, and that if you swallow water while you do it, it is not considered breaking the fast, and only the devil is trying to keep you away from communion by telling you that accidentally swallowing water while you. It's written in the ancient canons not to be afraid of washing your mouth and accidentally swallowing water before communion. So go ahead and do that so that you don't give us more occasions on which to exercise our faith by consuming the mucosa on the spoon. But I've done it, and I've also done that with people that were sick because they couldn't help it, and I've never worried. And I know most of and if any clergyman says, "Oh, the Eucharist certainly can make you sick because of," they say, well, it would be docetistic to say that the gifts are good and the viruses are evil matter. Well, I don't think that the gifts keep me safe because they're good matter and viruses are evil matter. Though, given the way viruses are structured, and again, look them up on Wikipedia. I'm not going to. I think one might argue that they are a result of the fall because they're not quite alive, right? They're only they have only a parasitical existence. So we might posit that they're a result of the fall, but that still wouldn't make their very atoms evil, because there is nothing evil at the atomic level. But the fact that that viruses are not evil on the level of their sheer matter doesn't mean that Christ Himself doesn't know what it is. It seems to me, just the the whole piety and experience of the church would militate against saying that the gifts that the gifts themselves are disease bearing. Such a thing is against both faith and piety and respect. But you know, it can happen that the gifts may be spoiled, you know, beyond the ability to consume them safely. And you know, there are things written about what to do in such a case. You know, I know of one case which wasn't quite that way, but it's actually a beautiful story. A priest was ordained in the Soviet Union and was immediately arrested and went to the Gulag, and somehow he got out of the Soviet Union, and he lived in America for a long time. And the bishop, the Rokor bishop, found out that he was a priest, and he said, "Father, why didn't you ever tell me you were a priest? Why didn't you, you know, you should say it." He said, "Well, I figured since God allowed me to be arrested," you know, he didn't proclaim himself as a confessor. Father Michael Orloff used to tell me all of his professors were confessors, and none of them said that about themselves. They had all been in the camps, or many of them, I guess. He was in seminary in the 70s. They said, but they wouldn't say, if they didn't talk about it, but if they did, they would say, "Well, it came to me for my sins." And so this priest assumed that because he was taken away immediately, that God had decided he wasn't worthy to serve. And the bishop said, "No, I give you a blessing, you're going to serve now." And he gave him a parish. And then that priest died in Florida. Father Alexander Lebedev told me this. So that priest died in Florida right after the Paschal Liturgy. But he hadn't consumed the gifts on the table of oblation. So he had this very blessed end, but in a very hot and humid environment, another priest had to come and consume the gifts like a day later. And, you know, and or maybe it was 2 days, but, you know, I mean, you know, unfortunately, sometimes things can happen where things become impossible to consume, and the church has a way for that. But I wouldn't want anybody to think that we believe, and our bishops, and I think all the Orthodox bishops in North America, as far as I can tell, but I haven't researched every last statement, have said clearly that they do not believe and do not wish for us to believe that the Eucharist itself carries disease. But you know, but there, you know, but the fact that the Eucharist carries disease doesn't mean that you can't catch it in the parking lot or the narthex or standing next to somebody in the temple or something like that. That would be unreasonably foolhardy. You know. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you, you were talking about visiting in all dressed up in mask and gown. Can you visit at all now?
That depends on where. I mean, I mean, our bishop has been quite insistent that we take every precaution, both for them and for us. I mean, he was frankly spooked at the beginning when he read about a diocese, a Roman Catholic diocese, but a bishop's staffing issues are transferable between confessions as a concern, where one bishop in Italy had lost 6 priests in March of this year, and our bishop looked and thought, like, you know, how would he replace several clergy? So, you know, but, you know, nevertheless, if people call me and they will let me go, I have. In fact, on my last Paschal service this year was unction, and he died later that day on the leave taking of Pascha. But it was well before the vigil hour, but after the and so the last service I began with Christ has Risen this year was with him, and his funeral was in Ascension Tide, as I recall. But so I was able to visit that hospital. There was a kind of a rigmarole to get in, but then there was another person. Now, he had received unction a while before, but I was preparing to go to the hospital, and they called and told me I wouldn't be allowed to see him. So I was going to give him unction again, but I wasn't able to. So you know, and this is the thing too. You know, I mean, like the history of Orthodoxy in the 20th century is full of occasions where, and all of our history going way back, you know, sometimes, you know, miraculously people are given the ability to receive the sacraments, and sometimes people have have to go. You know, we don't yet understand why a lot of these things happen. I mean, you know, the corkscrewed icon, which is now here in America, but it's 800 years old. You know, the revolutionaries tried to bomb it, and they blew apart the icon stand, and the icon itself was still there. But you know, the Ottomans burnt the relics of Saint Sava at Vračar. That's actually why the church of Saint Sava Vračar, the hill, is called the Church of Saint Sava Vračar. They built this huge cathedral in Belgrade where the relics were burned. But I mean, I have a suspicion here, just a, I think, an educated guess, that the Lord allowed the burning of the relics of Saint Sava to show the phoenix-like preservation of the faith in the Balkans and in Serbia. And indeed, you know, the Serbs, if that Pasha thought that he was going to break the attachment of Serbs to Orthodoxy, he was sadly mistaken. But they are as adamant as ever, thank God. You know, I mean, we should really believe that the Lord is taking care of us. We should really believe that we should try to take advantage of the sacraments when we can. And make a good use of them, but we should also take advantage of this current situation, because we can. You have but to get a few books like I'll put a plug, "Light in the Darkness" by Sergei Fudiel, who wrote about being a Christian in the Soviet Union and spending a lot of time in camps and a lot of time not near a church, and talking about what it meant for him to read the Paschal service, you know, when he was nowhere near a church. So, you know, the period of time under and what he went through in that case far exceeds the inconvenience of our Zoom or streamed worship. And I understand perfectly well that streamed worship is not any kind of ideal. I mean, it is the way that has been given to us by the apostles, that we gather together and we sing together and we hear the words together and we share the gifts together. I mean, that's been part of Christian identity from the beginning. And you know, I mean, and Zoom is better, or streaming services is better than nothing, but you know, it's not ideal. But you know, nevertheless, we're called to strengthen ourselves so that we know how to pray. You know, and that we're prepared to pray, you know, no matter what. You know, we have a very access to church is very convenient for those of us, at least in urban areas. You start going outside of the cities, and Orthodox churches are fewer and farther between still. But you know, so is there anything else either of you wanted to say?
I think we just have to speak with a great deal of love and patience to each other.
Yes.
And recognize that this is very difficult to agree on.
Yeah. Well, let me. You know, I'm not here to. I'm not making this video. I'm making this video to put as much information as I've had with my discussions with these lovely, intelligent, and well-educated people. So that you can help us with your expertise, which is combined with your faith and piety. But you know, I know that some people feel differently about, you know, some people feel differently about masks. They feel more oppressed than I feel by them. I feel annoyed by them sometimes, but I don't personally feel oppressed. I know other people feel differently. You know, I do not enjoy the level of restriction on our public life, particularly as it affects to our life of worship. I do not, you know, these are all trying on all of us, but you know, but we have to kind of all do our best you know, and just to be blunt, you know, within our own parish, there's a whole gamut, and so you know. I know that some of you in my parish, and in most parishes, you know, feel that the precautions that have been taken are the bare minimum and maybe even barely sufficient. And some of you find the precautions that are taken are terribly oppressive, but, you know, This is why we have bishops who make the calls, and but you should all of you should remember that there are people that you've been with every Sunday that feel. And another thing to think about is that there are people who, and this is particularly for those that feel that the church should have no precautions because every precaution somehow is a sign of lack of faith. And I think that's just wrong. I'm sorry, I do. I think it's wrong to say the church should take no precautions about COVID. I think it's wrong to say that every precaution, that any precaution affecting the life of Christians together is somehow impossible. One thing that people like that hold that opinion, and particularly if they hold that opinion and then decide. I mean, this was actually, not only did somebody announce that they were so Orthodox they weren't going to attend any services anymore at all because no Orthodox churches in America were canonical enough and had resisted COVID quarantine enough, but his things were picked up and trumpeted by websites. There wasn't just a stray YouTube channel. It was well, God bless you. You didn't want the church to be closed. Now you're cut off from the church completely. I hope you rethink that. If you think that, but there are people in our church and in most churches that do not necessarily live in a house with only other Orthodox people. So I live in an Orthodox family. You live in an Orthodox family. We might expect the people under our roof to understand the importance of going to liturgy. If you're living in a home with people that don't share our faith, and especially if they feel they're at risk, they're going to feel rather differently. And so it's important that we all have some patience for one another. I mean, there are people in my parish that I just love and think the world of that feel very differently, and they have very different family situations. And some people don't want to wear masks, and I understand why they don't want to wear masks. And some people, either they or their families are nervous about them coming, and I understand. Our bishops have actually been very gentle in not trying to push people too far one way or the other. But ultimately they have to make a decision about what they will bless for us to do. In our particular parish, we are blessed to have liturgy outside because we have a setup that's conducive for it. But other parishes have to come up with their own situation. But it's very important that we preserve a bond of charity both with our fellow Christians and with our neighbors, and try to be as patient as possible with each other. Because everybody. It's no secret that in our country, nerves were already frayed. I have felt that as there is less attention paid to Christ, less seeking of His grace happening in our country, I feel that it's become coarser. That's my opinion. But and now that everybody's nerves are frayed, and so there's a greater temptation to be, and I think that that's not what we're called to right now. I think we're called to patience, and we're called to patience with people, and we always were called to patience with people that we don't necessarily completely agree with. Even if we're coming from we feel like we have a completely different point of view. But I think we've gone well more than we meant to. But again, is there anything you want? It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption, thou gavest birth to God the Word. Truth Theotokos we magnify.